What is up, guys? Welcome back to Early Access Gamer. Listen, when the person who defined your world walks out the door, the physical space you're left in can feel like a cage. Sometimes the only way to rebuild your agency is to step into a digital sanctuary, but forget the cozy game myth. Today, we're breaking down the 20 essential games to play if your girlfriend left you, utilizing simulated social persistence and brutal discipline to reboot your psyche. From high-fidelity presence replacement to 2027's AI confidants, you won't believe the psychological power of number 15. Let's dive in. There is a strange, quiet mercy in the digital void. When the physical world becomes a graveyard of shared memories and unfulfilled promises, a screen offers something the real world often denies us: a clear, structured path to agency. We often hear the tired advice that the only way to heal is to retreat into low-stakes, cozy management sims. But I think that is a fundamental misunderstanding of the human spirit. Sometimes you do not need a warm blanket. You need the cold, sharp clarity of a challenge that demands everything you have. Sometimes the only way to rebuild yourself is to walk through fire. That is why we begin our list at number 20 with Elden Ring: Shadow of the Erdtree. Since its release in June of 2024, this expansion has stood as a monument to the philosophy of brutal resilience. When your personal life feels like it is spiraling into chaos, the Land of Shadow acts as an uncompromising anchor. It forces you to shed the distractions of your own head and exist entirely in the present moment. If you blink, you die. That level of focus is more than a game mechanic. It is a psychological reset button that transforms the stagnant ache of grief into a masterclass of mechanical precision and discipline. Now, I know what you're thinking. The community discourse surrounding this expansion was, to put it mildly, heated. A massive portion of players voiced deep frustrations over the extreme difficulty scaling of the bosses. There were constant complaints about those grueling, seemingly endless attack combos and those notoriously unreadable tells that made some encounters feel less like a fair duel and more like an escalating arms race. Honestly, they were not wrong. It is a punishing, sometimes borderline unfair experience that pushes against the very limits of patience. But here's why you need to play it anyway. That struggle is exactly the point. In the aftermath of a heartbreak, we often look for fairness where there is none. We look for a reason why things broke the way they did. Elden Ring does not care about your feelings, and in a weird way, that is liberating. It demands you master new tools to survive, like the brilliant addition of martial arts weapons. Trading in your heavy blade for hand-to-hand combat, literally punching and kicking your way through the darkness, provides a visceral, tactile sense of catharsis that no sword-swinging animation can replicate. It forces you to get up close, to learn the rhythm of the pain, and to eventually overcome it. By turning your frustration into focus, you aren't just clearing a boss, you're proving to yourself that you have the capacity to adapt, to learn, and to endure even when the deck is stacked against you. When your world feels like it has been reduced to rubble, the temptation is to retreat into something soft, to something simple, or something cozy. But we need to dispel the myth that recovery only happens in pastel-colored farms or low-stakes puzzle games. Sometimes you don't need a digital blanket, you need a mirror. You need a world that is just as scarred, cynical, and indifferent to your pain as the one you're currently trying to navigate. That brings us to number 19, The Witcher 3: Wild Hunt. Released back in 2015, this isn't just an open-world RPG, it is a masterclass in agency. You play as Geralt of Rivia, a man who lives on the fringes of society, constantly dealing with the fallout of choices made by those who came before him. If you're struggling with the emotional vacuum left by a partner, there is something deeply grounding about walking the path of a monster hunter who understands that the world rarely gives you a happy ending, but it does give you the choice to keep moving forward. Now, I have to be honest with you, the community has been loud about this for a decade. Yes, the combat is clunky. If you're coming from the razor-sharp fluidity of modern action titles, you're going to feel those awkward hitboxes, the unreliable camera angles, and a movement system that sometimes feels like you're trying to pilot a boat through a swamp. It is not an elegant dance. But here's the thing: that clunkiness forces you to stop button mashing and start thinking. The game's real magic lies in its preparation system on higher difficulties. You cannot just sprint into a fight and hope for the best. You have to study your bestiary, identify your prey, and meticulously craft the right oils, decoctions, and bombs. It demands a level of discipline that acts as a cognitive circuit breaker. When you're pouring your focus into brewing a specific potion to survive a contract, you aren't ruminating on your personal life. You're engaging in a form of simulated social persistence, building a transactional but deeply satisfying rhythm with a world that requires your full presence. The Witcher 3 excels because it doesn't try to coddle you. It offers a sprawling gray landscape where you're responsible for your own survival and your own moral compass. It is the perfect antidote to the aimless wandering that often follows a breakup. You have a job, you have a code, and you have a vast, indifferent wilderness to traverse. By replacing the chaos of your real-world absence with the structured, reactive, and often brutal logic of the continent, you gain a sense of control that is incredibly hard to find when your personal life is in tatters. It's not just a game about slaying monsters, it's a game about reclaiming your capacity to act with intent. Moving on to number 18, we shift from the gritty realism of the Northern Kingdoms to something much more ethereal. When the dust settles on a life you thought was permanent, the silence in your apartment can feel deafening. We often think the only way to heal is to retreat into the pastel-colored safety of cozy farming sims, but that is a shallow misconception. Sometimes you don't need a soft blanket, you need a hard, neon-drenched reality check. You need a space where you can rebuild your agency through sheer, unfiltered power. That brings us to number 18, Cyberpunk 2077. Night City is the ultimate architecture for the brokenhearted. It is a sprawling, dangerous sandbox that demands your full attention, effectively forcing you out of your own head and into the role of a mercenary reinventing their place in a world that wants them dead. While critics have spent years pointing out that your initial life path, be it Nomad, Street Kid, or Corpo, feels like a bit of a tease that doesn't fundamentally rewrite the entire narrative script, they are missing the point of the experience. The beauty of this game isn't in how you start, but in how you evolve. It is about the autonomy you exert within that chaos. The game masters what I call simulated social persistence. Through its reactive dialogue trees and complex AI companions, the game fills the void of human connection with high-fidelity digital presence. You aren't just clicking through text boxes, you're building bonds that feel earned. When you're not navigating those intense personal relationships, the gameplay provides a cathartic release that few other titles can match. By late game, you're essentially a god in the machine. Utilizing top-tier cyberware like the Devastand, which lets you warp time to a crawl, combined with the visceral high-speed lethality of Mantis Blades, the combat becomes a meditative dance of precision. It is a power fantasy that reminds you that you're still in control of your own trajectory, even when the world around you feels like it is collapsing. By the time the credits roll, you realize that while you cannot control the outcome of every choice, you can dictate the style, the speed, and the sheer impact with which you move through the world. If you need a place to process your grief while feeling like an absolute legend, Night City is waiting. Sometimes the most profound healing doesn't come from a sword fight or a high-octane heist, but from the simple, crushing weight of a final goodbye. We often talk about games as power fantasies, but there's a specific quiet courage required to sit with the ghosts of the past. Coming in at number 17, we have Spiritfarer. Spiritfarer is often slapped with the cozy game label, but that feels reductive. It's a game about death, transition, and the inevitable reality of moving on when someone you love is no longer part of your daily life. You play as Stella, ferry master to the deceased, tasked with building a boat, caring for your spirit passengers, and eventually guiding them to the afterlife. It is essentially an emotional boot camp for anyone currently navigating the wreckage of a breakup. The gameplay loop is built on a beautiful, melancholy rhythm. Everything takes place in real time. As you sail between locations, you aren't just staring at a loading screen. You're farming, cooking, fishing, and upgrading your ship. It forces you to stay present in the mundane, turning simple chores into a meditative practice of self-care. When your entire world feels like it has collapsed, there is something deeply grounding about physically nurturing a garden or preparing a meal for someone who, despite being a spirit, provides the kind of consistent, non-romantic companionship that feels remarkably stable. Now, I'll be honest with you, the game isn't without its detractors. A common critique in the community is that the experience can eventually feel like a chore simulator. Once the initial novelty of the emotional storytelling wears off, you're left with a lot of back and forth errand running that can feel tedious or repetitive. If you're looking for high-octane action, this might feel like a slog. But here's the rebuttal: that repetitive nature is the point. The errand running acts as a structural anchor. When you're grieving or feeling the sting of rejection, life often feels like a series of disjointed, overwhelming tasks. Spiritfarer uses that repetitive management to force you into a slow, deliberate pace. It's not a bug, it's a therapeutic device. By the time you have to say goodbye to your companions, you realize that the game isn't really about the ghosts, it's about you. It's about learning that you can survive the departure of those you hold dear and that you're capable of building something meaningful even in the middle of a vast, empty ocean. It is a necessary pit stop on this journey, teaching us that letting go is an active process, not a passive one. When your world feels like it has physically collapsed, the last thing you need is a game that holds your hand and tells you everything is going to be okay. Forget the cozy, low-stakes comfort games that everyone tells you to play after a breakup. Those titles often feel patronizing, like a sympathy card that doesn't actually understand the depth of your silence. Instead, you need something that mirrors the terrifying, beautiful expansion of existence itself. You need to realize that even if your personal universe has ended, the stars keep turning. Coming in at number 16, we have Outer Wilds. Since its original release back in 2019, this game has stood as a masterclass in existential perspective. You are dropped into a miniature solar system trapped in a 22-minute time loop, tasked with uncovering the secrets of an ancient civilization before the sun goes supernova. But here is the secret to its brilliance. Outer Wilds forces you to engage with the world through raw manual labor. In a gaming landscape increasingly dominated by automated travel and cinematic fast travel cutscenes, this game demands that you pilot your own ship. You are responsible for every thruster burn, every gravity-assisted landing, and every perilous navigation through crumbling planetary crusts. It is an exercise in total agency. You are the captain of your own survival, and there's something deeply therapeutic about that. Now, I hear the complaints from the community, and let's be honest, the controls can be brutal. If you're coming into this looking for a guided experience, you're going to be frustrated. The lack of hand-holding and the, at times, punishing nature of the low-gravity flight mechanics make it easy to feel lost or stuck. Some players argue that it is too directionless, that the navigation is just a barrier to progress. And sure, if you're looking for a dopamine-heavy checklist, this will drive you crazy. But that frustration is exactly the point. Navigating the void isn't supposed to be easy. Mastering the ship, failing, dying, and then having the grit to restart the loop and try again, that is where the healing happens. It teaches you that failure isn't the end of your story, but simply a reset point for a new perspective. By stripping away the artificial markers and forcing you to read the environment itself, Outer Wilds becomes a mirror for your own life. You learn that even in the face of inevitable destruction, the pursuit of knowledge and the beauty of discovery are enough to keep you going. It is the ultimate antidote to the feeling that your life has stalled, proving that you have the capacity to navigate even the most hostile, silent spaces if you just take the controls yourself. Sometimes the wreckage of a dissolved long-term relationship leaves you feeling untethered, drifting in a space where your physical surroundings feel like a hollow shell of what they used to be. In these moments, the digital world offers a sanctuary, a structured environment where you can rebuild your agency on your own terms. There is a persistent myth in gaming culture that the path to emotional recovery must be paved exclusively with cozy, low-stakes farming simulators. I'm here to tell you that this is a shallow misconception. Sometimes you do not need a soft blanket, you need the brutal discipline of a blade or the sprawling, meditative isolation of a landscape that demands your full attention to heal. Coming in at number 15, we have Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut. If you're looking to reconstruct your sense of self, there is perhaps no better place to do it than the haunting, windswept plains of 13th century Japan. The beauty of this game is not just in its visual fidelity, but in its pacing. It forces you to slow down, whether you're composing a haiku in the middle of a war-torn landscape or simply tracking the movement of the wind to guide your path. The game prioritizes reflection over chaos. It is a masterclass in using environment as a tool for grounding. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. When this director's cut first hit the scene back in August of 2021, the community was rightly frustrated. The upgrade pricing model was a point of significant contention, with many players feeling that the leap to the PS5 specific enhancements and the Iki Island expansion should have been handled with more consumer-friendly generosity. It led to some intense review bombing, and frankly, that frustration was valid. However, look past that corporate friction and you find a technical achievement that is genuinely therapeutic. The integration of the DualSense controller, haptic feedback, is a game changer for someone seeking a physical connection to their environment. You feel the distinct rhythmic thud of your horse's gallop changing as you transition from dirt to mud to tall grass. When you pull back on your bowstring, you feel the tension physically resisting your trigger finger. It creates a tactile sense of presence that is rare in open world gaming. It grounds you in the immediate now. By the time you reach the PC release in May of 2024, the experience feels polished and singular. It's an exercise in discipline, honor, and the quiet dignity of standing your ground when the world around you is shifting. It's not just a game about a samurai. It is a game about reclaiming your center, one deliberate step at a time. At number 14, we shift our focus to a title that often gets unfairly relegated to the shelf of mere comfort food, yet it functions as something far more vital for anyone currently navigating the wreckage of a dissolved long-term relationship. It is time we talk about Stardew Valley. There is a tired, shallow misconception that cozy games are the only path to recovery after a split, but that overlooks the tactical value of structured agency. When your real-world routine has been shattered and your sense of control feels non-existent, Stardew Valley offers a meticulously designed reactive environment that demands your attention to detail. Released back in February of 2016, this game is fundamentally about the labor of restoration. By taking a dilapidated plot of land and transforming it into a thriving, self-sustaining homestead, You are physically manifesting the process of rebuilding your own life. It is the digital equivalent of putting your own house in order, one day at a time, providing a consistent feedback loop of success that is often missing in the messy aftermath of a breakup. Now, I have to be honest with you, the game isn't perfect. A frequent point of critique within the community is the combat system. If you go into the mines expecting the precision of a dedicated action title, you're going to be disappointed. The mechanics are undeniably clunky, essentially boiling down to a simple click-to-swing interaction that feels dated compared to the sheer depth of the farming and social simulation mechanics surrounding it. However, I'd argue that this simplicity is actually a feature, not a bug. In this specific context, the game isn't asking you to master complex frame data or reflex-heavy parries. It's asking you to find meditative focus in the mundane. This is where the simulated social persistence really shines. You aren't just farming, you're engaging with a community that requires your presence and input. One of my favorite examples of this is the fish pond mechanic. You can populate your farm with legendary fish, and they will occasionally make absolutely absurd demands asking for rare items like Omni Geodes just to flourish. It sounds ridiculous, but fulfilling those strange specific requests gives you a sense of purpose. It bridges that emotional gap, offering a structured, reactive relationship that doesn't require the high stakes, volatile energy of a real-world partner. You are the architect of your own ecosystem, and in the silence of an empty house, that kind of agency is exactly what you need to start the reboot. Stardew Valley proves that healing doesn't always have to be about grand cinematic gestures. Sometimes it's just about planting seeds, waiting for the rain, and watching something grow because you decided it should. There is a persistent, shallow misconception that when you're grieving the loss of a partner, your only path to recovery is retreating into low-stakes, cozy farming sims. While there is a time and place for that, the reality is that sometimes the most effective psychological reboot comes from the sheer, overwhelming complexity of a world that demands your full attention. We need to stop viewing emotional processing as a passive act and start seeing it as an architectural project. Sometimes you need to rebuild your sense of agency by navigating systems that treat you with the same depth you feel you're currently lacking. That leads us to number 13 on our list, Baldur's Gate 3. Released in August of 2023, this is not just a game, it is an exercise in simulated social persistence. When your real-world environment suddenly feels empty, the game offers a radical reactive alternative. The brilliance of Baldur's Gate 3 lies in its party dynamics. Through incredibly deep reactive dialogue trees, you forge non-romantic bonds with your companions that feel genuinely earned. These characters react to your moral compass, your tactical blunders, and your triumphs in ways that bridge the gap left by the sudden absence of a significant other. It provides a structured, meaningful social feedback loop that the real world just isn't giving you right now. Mechanically, the game is a playground for your agency. Whether you're manipulating high ground for tactical bonuses or combining specific spells with terrain elements to solve combat encounters, they are intricate puzzles. The game rewards your intellect and your creativity. It forces you to plan, to adapt, and to take responsibility for the outcome of every skirmish. It's the antithesis of the helplessness you might be feeling in your personal life. Now, I have to be honest with you, the game isn't perfect. If you've spent any time in the community, you know the complaints about party management and inventory systems. They are undeniably clunky. Trying to wrangle your party members as a single unit can feel unintuitive, and moving items back and forth between backpacks is a tedious chore that can kill the pacing of an otherwise perfect session. But look, even with those friction points, the system serves a purpose. It forces you to slow down, to organize, and to manage the logistics of your existence, which is exactly the kind of grounding exercise you need when your life feels like it is spiraling. By the time you've optimized your party's gear and mastered the environmental combat, you'll realize you haven't just been playing a game. You've been rebuilding the internal architecture of your own decision-making process, one turn at a time. Coming in at number 12, we find ourselves on a desolate beach, staring out into the horizon of Death Stranding 2 on the beach. If the last few entries focus on the comfort of home, this is where we pivot to the architecture of solitude. There is a prevailing shallow misconception that when your heart is broken, you need to retreat into the pastel-colored, low-stakes safety of cozy games to heal. But honestly, that is often just a distraction. Sometimes you need the brutal, sprawling isolation of a world that demands you rebuild it one delivery at a time. Released for PlayStation 5 in mid-2025 and hitting PC in early 2026, this sequel is essentially a meditation on what happens when the bridges between us shatter. As an emotional architect, I find that Hideo Kojima's obsession with connection serves as the perfect mirror for your own post-relationship reality. You're tasked with reconnecting a fractured civilization, which is a poetic, if literal, representation of the work you need to do on your own psyche. Now, I have to be real with you, the community has been vocal about this one. A lot of players and critics feel that the narrative is a bit of a safe rehash, relying heavily on the familiar beats of the first game rather than evolving the concept. Some find the plot overly convoluted and repetitive, and frankly, I see where they are coming from. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, but here's the thing. In the wake of a breakup, the last thing you need is a radical, jarring change. Sometimes returning to a familiar, melancholic cadence is exactly what provides the psychological reboot you need. The game's technical brilliance shines in how it handles your downtime. You can hop into the VR training mode from your private room to test out gear and sharpen your skills. While it sounds like a simple mechanical addition, it is actually a masterful use of simulated social persistence. You aren't just grinding for stats, you're earning likes and refining your craft in an environment that is entirely under your control. It allows you to focus on self-improvement, even if it is just digital, while the world around you waits for your next move. The game forces you to consider the importance of literal and metaphorical bridges. It's a high-fidelity experience that mirrors the genuine, painstaking difficulty of reconnecting with yourself when you feel like your world has been torn asunder. If you're willing to look past the narrative familiarity, you will find a game that respects your need for space, structure, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done in a world that feels incredibly lonely. It is not just about the destination, it is about the quiet, meditative discipline of putting one foot in front of the other, even when the world in your heart feels like it is coming apart at the seams. We are halfway through our list, and if you have been feeling the weight of a recent departure, you have likely heard the advice to hide away in a cozy, low-stakes game to numb the pain. There is a prevailing, shallow misconception that cozy titles are the only path to recovery. But we know better. Sometimes you don't need a distraction, you need a mirror. You need a space that acknowledges the sheer scale of what you're processing. Coming in at number 11, we have Gris. Released back in December of 2018, Gris is less of a game and more of a non-verbal, visual, and auditory treatise on the 5 stages of grief. When you're reeling from a breakup, your internal landscape often feels fractured and muted. Gris begins in a world drained of color, mirroring that exact sense of emotional void. As the protagonist progresses, her dress gains new abilities, such as turning into a heavy block to shatter through floors or becoming a solid weight to withstand ferocious winds. These aren't just platforming mechanics, they are tactile manifestations of the strength you are forced to build as you navigate your own internal wreckage. Now, let us talk about the discourse surrounding this one. There's a vocal segment of the community that pushes back against its reputation as a purely serene experience. Some players find the platforming surprisingly janky, or they hit a mechanical wall that feels unnecessarily punishing for a game marketed as a meditative journey. If you go into this expecting a smooth hands-off walk in the park, you might find yourself frustrated. But here's the perspective shift, that friction is intentional. Grief is not a smooth, linear slope. It is jagged, it is awkward, and it is frequently frustrating. The moments where the movement feels heavy or the platforming demands precision are where the game actually meets you halfway. It forces you to engage with the environment rather than just floating through it. By the time you're manipulating the world to restore its vibrancy, you're no longer a passive observer of your sadness. You're an active participant in your own healing. It is a brilliant, albeit sometimes temperamental tool for reconciling with the heavy, complex emotions that follow a long-term separation. It proves that you don't need words to put your life back together. Sometimes you just need to keep moving forward. One heavy step at a time. We have reached the halfway point of our list. At number 10, we find a title that strips away the noise of the digital world to leave us with something far more essential: Journey. When you're wading through the debris of a broken relationship, the prospect of engaging with complex dialogue-heavy systems can feel exhausting. There is a common misconception in the industry that recovery must involve hyper-aggressive action, or conversely, the ultra-low stakes of a cozy farm simulator. We often assume that because we are hurting, we need to be coddled by bright colors and simple tasks. But that is a surface-level take. Sometimes the most effective psychological reboot isn't found in a task list, but in the profound silence of a shared, fleeting connection. Originally released on the PlayStation 3 back in 2012, Journey is an exercise in minimalist design. It is easy for critics to point at its short runtime. You can finish it in under 2 hours, or its lack of traditional combat or complex puzzles, often labeling it an interactive art piece rather than a game. And honestly, they are not entirely wrong. If you were looking for a deep inventory management system or a sprawling tech tree, you will not find it here. But to dismiss it based on its brevity is to miss the point of its design philosophy. The brilliance of Journey lies in its unique approach to companionship. Through the simple inclusion of a speak button, you emit rhythmic musical chimes. Without the crutch of voice chat or text logs, these chirps become your entire language. You coordinate movements, you signal directions, and you express genuine emotion to a complete stranger who is wandering through the dunes right alongside you. It is a masterclass in simulated social persistence. It reminds you that even when your personal life feels like a barren desert, you are not truly alone in this wider world. While the industry pivots toward the 2026 and 2027 horizon, where we will see high-fidelity environmental immersion and AI confidants designed to mimic human intimacy, journey remains the blueprint. It proves that you do not need complex reactive dialogue trees to form a bond. You just need a shared path and a willingness to chime at the person beside you. It is the perfect remedy for the specific kind of isolation that follows a breakup, offering a sense of presence that replaces the void left by a partner with the simple, dignified comfort of a fellow traveler. It is short, yes, but its impact lingers long after the credits roll. There is a prevailing shallow misconception that when your life falls apart, your only path to recovery is retreating into so-called cozy games, those low-stakes simulators that promise to fix you with chores and soft colors. But that is a lie. True emotional architecture isn't built on forced relaxation. It is built on the messy, uncomfortable work of processing change. Sometimes you don't need a farm to manage. You need a mirror to see the displacement you're feeling. That is why at number 9, we have Night in the Woods. Originally released in early 2017, this game is a masterclass in the specific melancholic ache of returning home, only to realize that while you've been away, everything and everyone has changed. It's not just a game about being a college dropout. It's a raw, honest exploration of that quiet horror where you realize you're growing apart from the people and places you once held as anchors. Mae Borowski's journey back to Possum Springs serves as a powerful catalyst for anyone dealing with the sudden void of a dissolved long-term relationship. It validates that feeling of displacement, reminding you that being lost is often the first step toward figuring out who you are when you aren't defined by a partnership. Now, I have to be fair here. There is a common critique in the community regarding the game's pacing. Some players find the transition from the grounded, character-focused drama of the first half to the more paranormal, mystery-driven plot of the second half to be jarring. And honestly, they aren't wrong. It can feel like a bit of a tonal whiplash. But I'd argue that this jarring shift is actually a reflection of the protagonist's own fractured mental state. In the middle of an emotional collapse, life rarely flows in a logical 3-act structure. It gets weird, it gets frantic, and it gets heavy when you least expect it. When the weight of your own thoughts becomes too much, the game gives you a perfect mechanical escape hatch, Demon Tower. It's this surprisingly deep, fully playable 16-bit dungeon crawler that Mae can play on her laptop in her bedroom. It's a meta-narrative tool that allows you to engage in simulated social persistence, focusing on a contained, conquerable challenge while the messy, uncontrollable reality of your real-world relationships continues to evolve in the background. Whether you're hacking away at enemies in the Demon Tower or just walking through the autumn leaves of Possum Springs, the game forces you to inhabit a space where the ending of one chapter isn't the end of your story. It's a reminder that even when your world feels like it is ending, the next day still happens and you're still here to navigate it. We often fall into the trap of thinking that healing after a breakup requires soft blankets, herbal tea, and low-stakes farming simulators. It is a shallow misconception that cozy games are the only path to recovery. In reality, sometimes you do not need to tend to digital crops. You need to face a mountain that threatens to crush you, proving that you have the agency to climb regardless of the odds. This is why number 8 on our list is, without a doubt, Celeste. Released back in January of 2018, Celeste is far more than a tight platformer about a girl climbing a mountain. It is a profound mechanical metaphor for the internal demons we all face when our worlds fall apart. As you guide Madeline, you're constantly met with failure. But the game is built around a singular philosophy. Try again and again and again. What makes this title such an essential piece of our healing guide is the brilliant inclusion of assist mode. If you're struggling with your own mental recovery, the game does not force you to suffer through pixel-perfect precision if you're not ready for it. You can tweak infinite stamina, toggle invincibility, or even slow the game speed down to a crawl. It allows you to tailor the experience to your current emotional bandwidth, ensuring that the journey remains accessible without ever stripping away the core narrative weight of the summit. Now, I have to be honest with you, the community has a valid point of contention here. As you dive into the optional B-side and C-side levels, the difficulty spikes aggressively. There are moments where the game introduces a complex, high-pressure movement mechanic and then demands total mastery of it within seconds. It can feel unfair, and for a player already reeling from personal loss, that lack of preparation time can be genuinely frustrating. However, I would argue that this is exactly why it belongs on this list. When you're going through a breakup, life feels like a constant unfair B-side level. You're thrown into scenarios you didn't ask for, and you're expected to navigate them without a map. Celeste mirrors that harsh reality. Yes, the difficulty is relentless, but the satisfaction of finally nailing a screen that felt impossible 10 minutes ago is a powerful psychological win. It teaches you that while you cannot control the mountain, you can absolutely refine your technique and persist until you reach the top. It is about rebuilding your sense of self-worth through the raw, repetitive act of choosing to move forward when everything inside you wants to quit. In a time where you might feel like you have lost your grip, Celeste reminds you that you're capable of far more than you realize. Sometimes the best way to process the silence of an empty apartment is to surround yourself with the vast, imposing silence of the Wyoming wilderness. We often fall into the trap of thinking that healing after a breakup requires the forced cheerfulness of a cozy village simulator, but that is a shallow misconception. There's a profound restorative power in isolation, and it is here that we find our number 7 pick, Firewatch. Released back in February of 2016, Firewatch isn't about saving the world or defeating a cosmic threat. It is about the deliberate, tactical practice of distance. You play as Henry, a man who takes a job as a fire lookout to escape the complexities of his own life. The gameplay loop is deceptively simple and tactile. You spend your time patrolling the forest using the Osborne Firefinder to meticulously triangulate smoke sightings in the distance. It is grounded, methodical work that demands your full attention, effectively forcing your brain to exit the feedback loop of rumination and enter the flow state of a professional observer. But the real magic of this game lies in its use of simulated social persistence. Your only link to the outside world is a handheld radio connecting you to your supervisor, Delilah. Through these reactive dialogue trees, you forge a deep, intimate bond with a voice on the other end. It is an exploration of how we can find genuine comfort and companionship in others, even when physical touch is entirely off the table. It bridges the emotional gap left by real-world absence, reminding us that connection is often about being truly heard rather than simply being in the same room. Now, I know what many of you are thinking. The community discourse surrounding the ending of Firewatch remains a frequent point of contention. A lot of players found the resolution to be unsatisfying, feeling that the buildup of the central mystery didn't deliver the high-stakes, explosive payoff they were promised. I get it. We are conditioned by the industry to expect a grand cinematic crescendo. But if you look at this through the lens of an emotional architect, that lack of payoff is precisely the point. Life rarely gives us neat blockbuster closures. Sometimes the mystery of someone else's life and the impact they leave on yours is just a chapter that closes, leaving you alone in the tower to face yourself again. That isn't a failure of storytelling. It is a brutal, honest reflection of the human experience. If you are looking to rebuild your sense of agency, there is no better place to start than by reconciling with the reality that some things simply don't have a grand finale. At number 6 on our list, we find ourselves at the intersection of absolute dread and total psychological immersion. If you're looking for a way to process the weight of a recent breakup, you might think you need a relaxing garden simulator, but that is a shallow misconception. Sometimes the most effective path to healing is not through soft blankets and herbal tea, but by plunging into a nightmare so meticulously crafted that it forces your brain to recalibrate its focus. This is the power of Reanimal, released on Friday, February 13th, 2026. And it serves as the ultimate case study in presence replacement. Reanimal operates as a masterclass in atmospheric pressure. It uses a shared directed camera system that is frankly diabolical. By stripping away your ability to freely manipulate the perspective, the game traps you in a state of constant suffocating claustrophobia. For someone dealing with the sudden, jagged void of a lost partner, this mechanical design isn't just a gimmick, it is a mirror. It forces you to project your external anxieties onto the environment. You aren't just playing a game, you're stepping into a dark, structured sanctuary where the fear on screen is tangible, manageable, and ultimately something you can conquer. It provides a cathartic release of tension that simple, cozy games just cannot replicate. Now, I have to be fair, the launch was not without its thorns. The community was rightfully frustrated, leading to a wave of review bombing on Steam because the highly anticipated Friends Pass feature was missing on PC at launch. It was a massive oversight for a title that relies so heavily on that shared co-op vulnerability. But look past the initial technical fumbles, which the developers are actively addressing, and you find a core experience that is essential for the grieving gamer. This game is a precursor to the 2027 horizon, where we expect to see even more sophisticated artificial intelligence confidants integrated into these massive high-fidelity worlds. Reanimal represents the bleeding edge of how we use digital presence to fill the gaps in our own lives. By navigating this twisted, decaying world, you're effectively practicing the art of moving forward through absolute darkness, tethered only to the immediate mechanical reality of the game. It is intense, it is uncomfortable, and it is exactly what you need when you're ready to stop wallowing and start surviving. It is a grueling, beautiful piece of design that demands your full attention, leaving absolutely no room for the ghosts of your past to creep back in. When you're staring at the ruins of a life you thought was set in stone, the last thing you need is a game that tells you everything is going to be okay. You don't need a cozy farm simulator, you need a mirror. You need a game that sits in the dirt with you, smokes a cigarette, and acknowledges that everything is fundamentally broken. That is why we arrive at number 5, Disco Elysium. This isn't just an RPG, it is a clinical dissection of a fractured man. You play as a detective who has lost his memory, his status, and his dignity, and you have to piece yourself back together one agonizing dialogue choice at a time. The brilliance here is the thought cabinet. Instead of worrying about legendary swords or armor sets, you are curating your own subconscious. You find thoughts in the world. You internalize them and you sit with them while they evolve, sometimes offering you profound wisdom and sometimes just burdening you with debilitating neuroses. It is the ultimate simulation of managing your own internal dialogue after a massive emotional trauma. You are literally editing your personality to survive the day. Now we have to address the elephant in the room. The history of this game is stained by the brutal studio drama that saw the original creative visionaries, Robert Kurvitz, Alexander Rostov, and Helen Hindpier, pushed out of ZUM by the studio's management. It is a messy, deeply unfair situation that has left the community rightfully cynical about the future of the intellectual property. It is frustrating to love a game that feels like a battlefield of corporate ego. But honestly, the game itself remains untarnished by that conflict. The text, the philosophy, and the brutal honesty of the Final Cut version released in 2021 are still masterpieces of the medium. Playing this game is like navigating the wreckage of your own relationship. You see the detective's self-destructive tendencies, his failures, and his desperate attempts to regain control, and you recognize those patterns in yourself. It teaches you that moving forward isn't about erasing the version of you that got hurt. It is about acknowledging the voices in your head, deciding which ones are worth listening to, and dragging yourself out of the gutter because that is the only rational choice left. It is heavy, it is cynical, and it is exactly the kind of harsh intellectual discipline you need to start rebuilding your sense of agency. When you finish this, you won't feel cozy, but you will feel remarkably, painfully human. We often mistake the healing process for a passive activity, assuming that quiet, gentle spaces are the only environments suitable for mending a broken heart. But sometimes you don't need a soft aesthetic to find yourself again. Sometimes you need to confront the monumental weight of change, the crushing responsibility of growth, and the hard physical reality of moving forward. That is where we find our number 4 pick. Coming in at the number 4 spot is God of War Ragnarok. Since its worldwide release on November 9th, 2022 for PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 and its subsequent migration to PC in September 2024, this title has served as a masterclass in narrative maturity. It is a story about holding on and letting go, mirroring the very trajectory you're currently navigating. Kratos' evolution from a force of pure singular rage into a nuanced figure grappling with the complexities of fatherhood provides a powerful lens through which to view your own life. It forces you to ask, who are you when the person you define yourself by is no longer there, and how do you change to protect what matters most? Mechanically, the game is a triumph of visceral feedback. There's a profound, grounding weight to every single strike. When you swing the Leviathan axe or the Blades of Chaos, you feel the momentum, and for those who find comfort in mastery, the introduction of a third weapon later in the game completely reinvents the tactical loop, ensuring that your combat options remain fresh and strategically demanding just as you feel you've mastered the rhythm of the battlefield. It is an excellent example of simulated social persistence. The dynamic reactive dialogue between Kratos and Atreus acts as a digital mirror for your own internal monologue, grounding you in a relationship that is constantly shifting and growing. Now, I hear the criticisms. You've likely heard the community chatter about the game's pacing. There are long, sprawling stretches in the first dozen hours where the narrative feels like it's meandering through endless walking and talking segments. It is a valid critique. The momentum can feel uneven compared to the high-octane spectacle of the boss fights. But when you're processing the wreckage of a dissolved long-term relationship, that meandering isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It mimics the reality of grief, where life slows down to a crawl, forcing you to sit in the quiet, uncomfortable moments with your companions. It requires patience, yes, but that patience rewards you with a depth of character development that is rare in the medium. It teaches you that the journey, even the parts that feel slow or heavy, is the entire point. If you need a game that demands you face the inevitability of change with the same intensity as a god, this is your sanctuary. When your internal narrative feels like it's been shattered, There's a specific kind of comfort found in the absolute uncompromising reality of the medieval world. We often talk about escapism as a way to flee our problems, but sometimes the cure for a broken heart isn't a fantasy dreamscape or a cozy farm. It's the brutal, grit under the fingernails discipline of self-improvement. That brings us to our number 3 pick, a game that demands you build your agency from the ground up, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Following its February 4th, 2025 release, this title cemented itself as the ultimate reboot experience. In a landscape saturated with power fantasies, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 takes the opposite approach. You start as a nobody, and every ounce of competence you earn, whether it's learning to read, swinging a sword, or surviving a wilderness trek, feels earned because the game refuses to hand it to you. It's a grounded simulation where your success is the direct byproduct of your own labor.
What makes this so effective for someone in the midst of a life transition is the game's reactive world.
The NPCs aren't just waiting around for you to trigger a quest, they have their own agency. They wake up, they labor, they visit the tavern, and they go home. Living in a world that moves forward regardless of your presence is weirdly therapeutic. It reminds you that the world is vast and persistent, and that you are an active participant in a living machine that doesn't care about your heartbreak, but rewards your persistence. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't address the elephant in the room. The lead up to this launch was, to put it mildly, a minefield. The discourse was choked by intense culture war debates ranging from aggressive community management tactics to heated arguments over the game's code of conduct on Steam. It was easy to get swept up in the negativity or feel alienated by the noise. But here's the thing, if you can filter out the internet shouting match, you'll find a technical achievement that is arguably unrivaled. Don't let the manufactured drama keep you from a masterclass in historical immersion. When you're feeling isolated, there's something profoundly grounding about mastering a system that works on its own terms. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 offers a structured path to growth that acts as a mirror for your own recovery. It doesn't promise you a magical fix. It offers you a world where if you put in the work, you become a force to be reckoned with. By the time you've navigated the political and social hurdles of Bohemia, you'll find that the sense of confidence you built in-game has started to bleed over into your real life. You aren't just playing a character, you're practicing the art of moving forward when the weight of the world feels heavy. It's a reminder that even when you start with nothing, resilience is a skill you can and will develop. Sometimes the wreckage of a life built for two requires a total sensory overwrite. We often fall into the trap of thinking recovery is exclusively found in low-stakes, cozy games. Those quiet gardens where you simply plant crops and wait for the seasons to change. But that is a surface-level prescription. When the silence of an empty apartment becomes deafening, you do not need a hug. You need a world so dense, so reactive, and so aggressively tactile that it forces your brain to recalibrate entirely. You need a presence replacement, so complete it leaves no room for intrusive memories. That is exactly where our number 2 pick, Crimson Desert, enters the frame. Launching on March 19th, 2026, this isn't just an open world title, it is a violent, high-fidelity escape hatch. The sheer scale here serves as a psychological reboot, pulling you into a landscape that demands your absolute focused attention. When you're navigating the complexities of its combat system, you simply don't have the bandwidth to ruminate on the past. The game introduces a visceral, almost chaotic level of player agency. You can grab enemies to use as literal meat shields against incoming fire, or lean into its grappling mechanics to execute punishing, wrestling-style takedowns on massive bosses. It turns survival into an art form, grounding your frustration in the kinetic feedback of the controller. Now, I have to be real with you, the community is rightfully anxious. There's a cloud of skepticism hanging over this launch because the developers have been notoriously cagey about showing actual footage of the game running on PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X and S. After the painful lessons we learned with the initial launch of Cyberpunk 2077, it is fair to worry that we might be looking at another unoptimized performance disaster. It is a valid concern and one that should make every gamer cautious with their pre-order dollars. However, even with that shadow of uncertainty, I cannot help but be drawn into what Crimson Desert promises. Its environmental immersion is designed specifically to drown out the noise of your own life. In a year where we are seeing a shift toward AI-driven companions and simulated social persistence, games like this represent the next evolution of the digital sanctuary. By providing a world that feels this responsive to your presence, the game acts as a proxy for the world you lost, replacing the void with constant evolving stakes. If the optimization holds, this will be the ultimate masterclass in how to disappear entirely when you need to most. Stay tuned, because we are finally at the top of the list. We've spent this list exploring the quiet, the introspective, and the meditative challenging the tired trope that recovery only happens in a quiet garden or a cozy cottage. Sometimes healing isn't about sitting with your feelings, it is about outrunning them in a world so deafeningly loud and hyper-real that your own life becomes a distant memory. For our number one spot, we are turning to the sheer, unadulterated force of the most anticipated title in history. It is time to lose yourself in the chaotic, sun-drenched sprawl of Grand Theft Auto 6. Arriving on November 19, 2026 for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S, Grand Theft Auto 6 isn't just a game, it is a total sensory override. When you're reeling from a breakup, the last thing you need is a stagnant environment. You need a world that breathes, reacts, and pushes back. The technology here is staggering. We are talking about physics systems that push the boundaries of what we thought consoles could handle, like dynamic muscle and body deformation. Seeing your character interact with the world, like their chest realistically compressing against a car windshield during a high-speed stunt, creates a level of tactile presence that anchors you firmly in the now. It provides a sense of physical agency that the real world currently lacks. However, we have to keep it real. It is impossible to talk about this game without addressing the elephant in the room, the massive controversy regarding Rockstar Games and their labor practices. Allegations of union busting and the firing of dozens of developers have cast a long shadow, leading to valid protests and a stinging sense of irony. It is a bitter pill to swallow when a company that has spent decades perfecting the art of satirizing corporate greed is accused of embodying it in their own halls. It is a legitimate concern, and it is okay to feel conflicted about supporting a product born from that friction. Yet, despite that valid, heavy critique, the promise of this specific digital sanctuary remains undeniable for someone in the middle of a life-shattering transition. In the wake of a lost long-term relationship, you're often left with a lack of external structure. Grand Theft Auto 6 offers a chaotic, high-stakes playground where you can forge your own path, focusing on immediate thrills and complex reactive systems that demand your full attention. It is the ultimate presence replacement. By stepping into the shoes of someone living at the absolute edge of society, you're forced to abandon the past and exist entirely in the immediate momentum of the next mission. It is a brutal, high-fidelity reboot for your brain, offering a distraction so absolute that it effectively erases the emotional vacancy left behind by your ex. Sometimes to find yourself again, you have to disappear into a world that doesn't know who you were, only who you're choosing to be right now. And that's our list for 20 video games to play if your girlfriend left you, the 2026 Healing Guide. I hope these titles help you find some much needed peace and distraction. Remember, you're not alone in this. Sometimes a great story is the best remedy. If this video helped you out, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more gaming content. What did we miss? Let us know your own favorites in the comments below. Here's some more videos of ours you can watch. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.